There was a man who could not sleep. It was 3 in the morning, and the house around him was silent, but inside him a parliament was in session. Every voice spoke at once. He rehearsed conversations that had not happened. He defended himself against accusations no one had made. He built bridges across rivers he had not yet reached, and then, lying in the dark, he watched those bridges collapse. He gripped the future with both hands, certain that if he only thought hard enough, worried thoroughly enough, planned obsessively enough, he could force life to behave. And the harder he gripped, the more it slipped through his fingers like water. This man is not a stranger. You have met him in the mirror. I have met him in the consulting room 1,000 times, wearing 1,000 different faces. He arrives exhausted, hollowed out by a war he has been waging against the dark, and he asks me the wrong question. He asks me how to stop the worry. He believes the worry is the enemy. He does not yet understand that the worry is a messenger, and that the message it carries has been waiting at the threshold of his soul for years. He who is not willing to listen to the small anxious voice within will be ruled by it from the shadows. This is the law of the unconscious, and it is merciless to those who ignore it. So before we speak of how everything falls into place when worry ends, we must first descend carefully into the place where worry is born. Because the most important thing about your anxiety is not what it is keeping you from, it is what it is trying to tell you. There is an old idea, far older than psychology, that the soul has a center, not the ego, that busy little manager who answers the telephone and signs the documents and believes itself to be the master of the house. The center is something deeper, something the alchemists circled around for centuries without quite naming, something I came to call the self. The ego is a small island. The self is the sea that holds it. And worry, when you look at it closely, is almost always the ego trying to do the work of the sea. Consider what actually happens when you worry. You take the entire mystery of your existence, the vast unknowable weave of cause and consequence, and you attempt to compress it into something the ego can hold and control. You become a clerk frantically auditing a future that has not arrived. You believe that vigilance is protection, that if you simply suffer the catastrophe in advance, in imagination, you will somehow be spared from suffering it in reality. This is one of the oldest superstitions of the human heart, and almost no one recognizes it as superstition. We call it being responsible. We call it being realistic. We rarely call it what it is, which is a quiet refusal to trust anything larger than the ego. Now, anxiety itself is not a flaw in the machine. I want to be precise about this, because here the popular advice goes badly wrong. Anxiety is a signal. It is the psyche announcing that something demands attention, that a value has been violated, that a part of you has been neglected, that you are standing at a crossroads you have been pretending not to see. The neurotic does not suffer from anxiety the way one suffers from a disease. The neurotic suffers from the meaning the anxiety is pointing toward, a meaning he has refused to face. And so the worry circles and circles like a dog at a locked door, because the door has never been opened. What most people overlook hides precisely here. They try to silence the messenger before reading the message. They medicate the symptom, distract the symptom, shame the symptom, and they wonder why it always returns, stronger and stranger than before. Whatever we push down does not disappear. It descends into the shadow, and from the shadow it governs us. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So the question is not how to stop worrying. The question is what your worry has been guarding, and what would happen if you finally let it speak. And the answer to that question begins, oddly enough, with a story about rain. My friend Richard Wilhelm, the great translator who first opened the I Ching to the Western mind, once told me a story he had witnessed in a remote province of China, and I have repeated it many times since, because nothing I have ever read in a textbook expresses the truth more completely. There had been a terrible drought. For months no rain had fallen, and the land was dying. The people had tried everything. The Catholics made processions. The Protestants offered prayers. The Chinese burned joss sticks and fired guns to frighten away the demons of drought. Nothing came. The sky remained as hard and bright as iron. At last the villagers sent for a rainmaker, an old man who lived in another province. He arrived in a covered cart, a small dried-up figure, and the first thing he asked for was a quiet little house on the edge of the village. There he shut himself away. He asked for nothing but a small amount of food each day, and then he simply remained inside, alone, for 3 days. On the 4th day the clouds gathered, and then, against all season and all sense, it began to snow in a quantity that no one could remember ever having seen, and the drought was broken. Wilhelm, astonished, went to the old man and asked him how he had done it. Could he truly make snow? The rainmaker was almost offended. Of course not, he said. He had not made the snow. And then he explained. When he had arrived in this region, he had found that everything was out of order. The land was not in Tao, in harmony with the way of heaven. And because he himself had come from a place that was in order, he too had fallen out of Tao the moment he entered this disordered country. So he said he had needed 3 days alone to put himself back in order. And once he himself was again in Tao, then naturally the rain came. I have spent my whole life turning that story over in my hands, and I have never reached the bottom of it. The rainmaker did not assault the heavens. He did not strategize against the drought. He did not lie awake at 3 in the morning calculating how to defeat the sky. He withdrew, he became quiet, and he restored the order within himself. And the order within himself was somehow continuous with the order of the world. Here begins the darkest and most beautiful game of the unconscious, the secret that the rationalist mind cannot tolerate. Sometimes the thing you are desperate to fix out there can only be approached by the work you do in here. The East knew this and called it Wu Wei, the action that is not forcing, the doing that flows from non-doing. The Taoist sage does not dam the river, he learns the river. And the alchemists of the West, those strange dreamers bent over their furnaces, knew it too, though they spoke a different language. They believed that before any true transformation could occur, the matter had to be dissolved. They called this stage the solution, the dissolution, and before that, the nigredo, the blackening, the dark night when everything you trusted falls apart and rots. No gold without first the blackening. No new self without the dissolving of the old one. The ego, with all its frantic worry, is precisely the thing that must be dissolved. And dissolution feels, while it is happening, exactly like losing control, exactly like the thing you fear most. What mythology has been trying to tell us for centuries lives in this very image. Think of Jonah, swallowed by the great fish and carried down into the lightless deep. He did not fight his way out, he could not. He surrendered into the belly of the dog. And it was the surrender, not the struggle, that carried him to the far shore. Think of every hero who must ascend into the underworld before he can return transformed. The descent is never a defeat. The descent is the doorway. He who refuses to go down will never truly rise. And worry is the soul's refusal to go down, the endless treading of water on the surface so that one never has to feel what waits below. There is an ancient symbol the alchemists loved, the Ouroboros, the serpent that swallows its own tail, the circle of death and renewal, feeding eternally into itself. It is an unsettling image, but it carries a consolation that the worrying mind can never quite believe. It says that the end is folded into the beginning, that what dissolves will reconstitute, that the dark phase is not the final phase. The warrior lives in a universe of straight lines, where every problem runs toward catastrophe and stops. The deeper psyche lives in circles, in seasons, in the eternal turning where winter is not the end of the garden, but its hidden work. And the Great Mother, the oldest face of the unconscious, has always known this. She is the one who receives everything that falls, who composts every loss into new soil. To trust her is not weakness, it is the most difficult courage there is. There is one more thread from the East that I wove into my own thinking and never let go of. When I wrote the foreword to Wilhelm's translation of the I Ching, I tried to describe a principle for which our Western science has no name, a principle I came to call synchronicity. It is the idea that events can be bound together not only by cause and effect, the iron chain the warrior trusts above all things, but by meaning, that the inner state and the outer event can rhyme. that the world is not a dead machine grinding blindly toward your ruin, but a living web in which your own psyche participates. The anxious mind cannot tolerate this thought. It sees only random catastrophes marching out of an indifferent void, and it appoints itself the lonely sentry against them all. But the person who has begun to trust the self starts very slowly to notice the rhymes. The way the right book falls open to the right page. The way a dream anticipates the day. The way a door closes only so that another, unseen, can open. This is not magic, and it is not the lazy wishful thinking of those who refuse to look at the dark. It is something far quieter. It is the recovery of a relationship with the world that worry had severed, the dawning sense that you were never abandoned in a hostile universe, only estranged from a living one. But let us leave the ancient world for a moment and turn to the strange country we actually live in, because the modern soul worries in a way that no previous age ever did, and it is worth understanding why. Modern man has lost his gods, but he has not lost his need for them. He banished them from the heavens, and they did not vanish. They descended into the unconscious, where they live on as compulsions, as obsessions, as the nameless dread that visits at 3 a.m. We thought we were becoming free of superstition. In truth, we simply stopped knowing the names of the powers that move us. And so the modern person has built a new religion, and its central rite is worry. We worship the god of control. We believe with a faith no medieval peasant could match that the future is an engineering problem, that with enough vigilance and enough optimization and enough anxious foresight, we can eliminate uncertainty from a life that is made entirely of uncertainty. The smartphone glows in the dark like a votive candle. We refresh the feed the way our ancestors fingered prayer beads, searching for a sign, for reassurance, for some omen that we will be all right. And we are more anxious than any generation that has ever lived, surrounded by more comfort and more safety than our ancestors could have dreamed. What I observed in my patients in the previous century, I would observe 1,000-fold today. The exhaustion is not from labor. It is from the refusal to surrender. It is the burnout of a creature that has appointed itself the manager of the universe and cannot resign the post. We have confused worry with love, believing that to stop worrying about someone is to stop caring. We have confused worry with intelligence, believing that the anxious mind is the perceptive one. And the most disturbing part is yet to come, because this private worship of control does not stay private. When enough individuals refuse to face the chaos within themselves, that chaos does not disappear. It pools. It gathers into what I have called the collective shadow, the vast reservoir of everything a culture refuses to know about itself. And then it finds a vessel, a scapegoat, an enemy out there onto whom the unbearable inner darkness can be projected. Modern man searches for enemies outside while quietly losing the war within. Every catastrophe of the last century, every collective madness, began as a private refusal to descend, multiplied across millions of souls. The man who will not meet his own shadow at 3 a.m. will meet it at noon, in the streets, where in the face of his neighbor. This is not politics. This is psychology, written across history in letters of fire. So when I say that everything falls into place when you stop worrying, understand that I am not selling you a comfort. I am describing a discipline far harder than worry, and infinitely more dangerous to the small managing ego. Because to stop worrying truly is not to stop caring. It is to stop pretending that you are the author of a story you are actually inside of. Now we must be careful, because here the path forks, and one of the two roads leads nowhere. The first road is repression. You decide by force of will that you will simply stop worrying. You clamp down on the anxiety. You distract yourself. You perform serenity. This never works, and worse, it backfires. Whatever you repress gains power in the dark. The anxiety you refuse to feel does not leave. It goes underground and returns as insomnia, as illness in the body, as a sudden inexplicable rage, as a depression that seems to come from nowhere. The forced smile is the mask of the persona, and behind every rigid persona, the shadow grows fat and restless. This is not surrender. This is a thinner, more brittle form of control. The second road is the real one, and it begins not by fighting the worry, but by turning to face it. In my practice, I would invite the patient to do something that sounds absurd until you try it. I would invite him to give the worry a form, a face, even a voice, and then to speak with it. I call this active imagination. You sit in the quiet, and instead of being swept along by the anxious thoughts, you step slightly to the side and you ask the anxiety directly, what do you want? What are you protecting? What are you afraid I will see if you ever fell silent? And the astonishing thing, the thing that has moved me again and again across decades, is that the worry almost always answers. And its answer is almost never what you expected. Beneath the worry about money, you may find a child who was once made to feel that he was a burden. Beneath the worry about your work, you may find a grief you have never let yourself feel. Beneath the worry about the future, you may find, very simply, the unmourned losses of the past, dressed up as forecasts. The worry was never about the thing it claimed to be about. It was a sentinel standing guard over a wound. And once you turn and tend the wound, the sentinel can finally lay down its arms. This is what it means to make the unconscious conscious. Not to defeat it, to befriend it. Your dreams will help you in this if you let them. The dream is the unconscious speaking in its own ancient tongue, uncensored by the daylight ego. And it will often show you, with uncanny precision, exactly what your worry has been circling. I have watched a single dream relieve a man of an anxiety that years of reasoning could not touch, because the dream did not argue with him. It showed him. It is no accident that the deepest healings so often arrive in the dark, in sleep, when the controlling mind finally lets go of the wheel. The real turning point begins right here, in the willingness to be shown rather than to know. And then there is the practice that no method can teach, the one the rainmaker understood. There comes a point in this work where you must simply put yourself back in order and trust that the rain will fall in its own time. You tend your garden, you do the work that is genuinely yours to do, the next honest thing, the task in front of you, and then you release your grip on the harvest. You do not pull the seedling upward to make it grow faster. You water it, you give it light, and you trust the intelligence that lives inside the seed, an intelligence far older and far wiser than your anxious managing mind. The self has its own way of ordering a life, and that ordering moves on a time scale the ego finds intolerable. Falling into place is a process, not an event. It looks from the inside almost exactly like waiting. And here I must guard against a misunderstanding that has ruined this teaching in lesser hands. To surrender is not to resign. The resigned man has given up. He has collapsed into apathy and called it peace, and his stillness is the stillness of a swamp. Surrender is something else entirely, something alive and demanding. The surrendered person is intensely engaged, fully present, doing the work that is genuinely his to do with all the strength he has, and yet he has loosened his stranglehold on the result. He acts and then he releases. He plants and then he trusts. There is paradoxically more energy in this than in all the frantic striving of the worried ego, because none of it is squandered on the impossible labor of controlling the uncontrollable. The resigned man has stopped rowing altogether and drifts wherever the water takes him. The surrendered man has simply stopped rowing against the current and discovered to his quiet astonishment that the river had been flowing toward the sea the entire time. The difference between them is invisible from the outside and absolute from within. One has abandoned his life. The other has finally consented to it. Here we arrive at the paradox that sits at the dark heart of all of this. And it is a paradox I never tired of contemplating. The psyche obeys a law I called enantiodromia, the running of all things toward their opposite. Push anything far enough and it transforms into its contrary. The more violently you pursue control, the more chaos you generate, because the very effort of control fragments you, exhausts you, blinds you to the living moment, and severs you from the deeper order that was always carrying you. And conversely, the moment you genuinely let go, a strange and reliable order begins to emerge, not the order you demanded, a better one. An order you could never have engineered, because it draws on a wisdom your ego does not possess. This is the meaning hidden inside that simple sentence: when you stop worrying, everything falls into place. It does not mean the world will rearrange itself to flatter your wishes. The drought does not always break. The losses are real. The dangers are real. The night is genuinely dark. What changes is not the world. What changes is that you stop fighting the arrangement of things long enough to discover that you were never holding the universe together by your worry. It was holding you. The ego dies a little in this discovery, and that small death is the most frightening thing a person can face, because the ego experiences any loss of control as annihilation. But on the far side of that little death, something is born. The mystics called it surrender. The alchemists called it the conjunction, the sacred marriage of opposites, the union of the conscious and the unconscious into a whole greater than either. I called it individuation, the slow becoming of the person you were always meant to be. In the darkest corner of your soul waits the light you fear the most, and it is the light of your own wholeness. The why is the price you pay to remain divided, to keep the managing ego enthroned and the deeper self in exile. And the peace that arrives when war ends is not the empty peace of distraction or denial. It is the peace of a person who has gone down into the depths, met what lived there, and come back able to hold both the light and the dark in the same two hands. That peace cannot be taken from you by circumstance, because it was never built on circumstance. It was built on a relationship with the ground of your own being. I do not promise you this will be easy. Everything cheap in the soul is acquired easily, and everything precious is acquired through descent. The path from the void ego to the trusting self runs through the underworld, through the nigredo, through the dissolution of the very certainties you are clutching most tightly right now. You will be asked to release things you swore you could never release. You will be asked to sit in the unbearable not knowing, and to wait like the rainmaker in his small quiet house until the order within you is restored. And then, perhaps, the snow will fall. So I will leave you not with an answer, but with a question, the way the unconscious always leaves us, because the answer is not mine to give. It lives in you, and it will only speak when you grow quiet enough to hear it. Sit with this tonight when the house is silent and the old parliament begins its session in the dark. Ask yourself, honestly, what is your worry truly guarding? What wound have you set it to watch over, year after year, so that you would never have to feel it? And what would you have to release? What small death of control would you have to die for your life to finally, quietly fall into place? When was the last time you stopped trying to make the rain and simply put yourself back in order? The snow is waiting. It always was. The only question is whether you are ready to stop reaching for the sky and turn at last toward the silence within,